They never see the monster coming, do they? I always thought that was the weird part of these stories. It's always out of the blue, an unexpected sighting. Not for me, not exactly. I didn't see it coming per se, but I knew it was there. I was looking for it and I had a trail to follow. There are reports in the southern United States of a large ape-like creature. The details vary as much as the legitimacy of each claim. When enough of those stories line up, however, that's when I investigate. There's a team of us, but normally these preliminary investigations are done solo. It's quicker and cheaper to send one team member on a plane than it is to pack up the entire institution. If one thing is true about our government, they're penny pinchers. If the initial search discovers some additional proof, or if the fallout from the reported sighting escalates too high, then more people are dispatched to the location. Those people came after my encounter. They came, they searched, and they found something just like I did. I can't speak to their journey, though. Just know at the end of all this, I'm confident that the thing I saw was taken away in a cage. I was following up on reports of the ape beast in a stretch of Texas woods. A hiker had been scared half to death, and an off-duty fireman had seen something indescribable through the scope of his hunting rifle. The two reports wouldn't have seemed related at all, except for one specific detail. They described a stench. They described an acidic, earthy smell that made their throats sweat and their lungs curdle. I picked up that same aroma as I ventured into the woods. I found a few hair samples, long strands plucked by the trees and brush. The scent was coming from these strands. Eventually, one of the clusters of hair was near enough to a large animal trail that I thought, just maybe, it would be the path of the beast. I got lucky. The longer I followed it, the stronger the smell became. That's how I knew I was close. I wrapped a handkerchief around my face to smother out the scent. It was burning my eyes and turning my stomach. I knew I had to continue even if it was getting hard to breathe. It embarrasses me to admit it, but eventually I gagged. I choked and vomited onto the ground, adding the odor of my own bile to the stink in the woods. I braced myself against a tree and wiped my mouth with my sleeve. When I reached for my water bottle, hoping to rinse the taste from my mouth, that's when it appeared. It didn't surprise me. It didn't catch me off guard. If I was emptying the contents of my stomach, I was confident that I was practically on top of the thing. The sound of my retching must have drawn it out. When the plastic brim of the bottle reached my lips, I saw it standing nearby. It loomed between the trees, ducking its head to avoid getting its hair tangled in the branches hanging from above. It cleared 7 foot easy. I wish I could say it watched me and then vanished, but the ape beast was unhappy with how close I'd come. Its face was twisted in a snarl, narrowing its beady eyes and curling its lip to reveal massive canine teeth. Its flat nose flexed with every heaving breath. At the time, I couldn't imagine what had upset it. I must have been in its territory, was all I could think. It wanted me out, plain and simple. And with my own sighting as fuel, I knew I could leave and come back with an entire team of capable hunters and trackers. I turned and ran. I heard its footfalls strike the ground like a sledgehammer smacking concrete. It roared loudly and closed in. I wasn't going to let it catch, but I'd be lying if I said that I didn't feel its breath on my neck. The air from its mouth was so hot that it practically burned my skin. A rash broke out on my shoulders a few days later. I can't imagine what kind of bacteria was living on that thing. I stuck to the paths I knew would be too narrow for its massive body. After its shoulder struck more than a few trees, it slowed down. I lost it. And slowly but surely, the scent faded. I caught my breath and collapsed in my car, stripping away my outer layers and tossing them out the window. I was covered in the stink and it wasn't letting me breathe. I wondered if that was its purpose. If you can't breathe, you can't run. That's one way to gain advantage over your prey. Within the next 2 days, the full team was dispatched. Local news outlets were informed that a sick bear was caught in the woods and would be taken in for treatment. Sick bears are the usual explanation. Something that struck me as odd, however, is where the bear was supposedly caught. I was assured privately that it was the beast I saw, and I knew I couldn't be told the absolute truth due to the nature of our job, but the animal was caught miles away from my encounter. If it had been so eager to protect its territory when it spotted me nearby, why was it suddenly so keen to leave? Why had it traveled so far in such a short amount of time? You see, I want to end this story on a positive note. The institution I work for does a great job at keeping these wild areas safe. But sometimes we do overlook the details. For me, this territory is one of those details. If it was protecting its kin, for instance, and wanted to lead us away from its family, well, we wouldn't know that until the next sighting comes around, would we? Okay, so here's the thing. I'm just an average guy. Nothing special about me, really. Live in a suburb just outside of Atlanta. Not a city dweller, but far from a country bumpkin, too. I guess you could say I'm comfortably in the middle. Now, I'm not going to name the place. I mean, you'll have to forgive me for that. But the fewer folks who can trace this back to me, the better, right? I hope you get where I'm coming from. Alright, so, you know how these stories usually start off with some sort of landmark, right? In this case, let's say the landmark is the old water tower. For a long time, it was the heart of the town, pumping life into our homes, until it was abandoned. Now it just stands there, all rusty and silent, like a ghost of our past. But the thing is, that's not what this story is about. I mean, sure, the water tower is important, but the real focus is on what happened there about 15 years ago. See, there was this time when people around town started talking about something weird happening at the water tower. Strange lights, odd noises, the kind of thing you'd expect in one of those late-night paranormal television shows. And then, out of nowhere, the water tower. It just collapsed, just like that. No warning, no signs, just fell to the ground one night. And the strange thing is, no one could figure out why. Well, maybe that's not entirely true. Some folks, the ones who saw the lights and heard the noises, they said it was because of some creature. Now, I know what you're thinking. A creature? Really? But the thing is, I saw it too. And it wasn't any animal I'd ever seen before. It was like a large shadow shifting and changing. Sort of like those Rorschach ink blots you see in movies. And the eyes, those glowing red eyes, they'd pierce right through you. After the tower fell, the creature just vanished, like it had never been there at all. But I remember it. I remember what I saw. Now here's where things get a bit weird. I've been working at the local library for a while now. I know, not the most exciting job, but it pays the bills. And every once in a while, I get to go through old newspaper clippings. So, a couple of months back, I was going through some stuff about the water tower. And there it was, a report about our shadow creature. It was chilling. It read, "I thought there was a wild dog in my backyard, but when I went out to see, it wasn't a dog. It was this huge shadow, constantly changing its form. And those red eyes, they stared right at me. That's not all, though. When I tried to find the person who had written the report, I found out they had died a few days after the water tower collapsed. And that's not the only one. Every single person who had reported seeing the creature, they were all gone. Accidents, illnesses, you name it. It was like they had been cursed. So, here I am, wondering about this creature. Wondering if it had something to do with the water tower. Wondering if I'm next. I mean, I want to know more. I want to find out the truth. But what if that means I'll end up like the others? What do you think? I mean, should I dig deeper? Should I let someone else know about this? Or should I just keep my head down and forget all about it? There's a reason why people stopped talking about the creature, right? There's a reason why it was forgotten. And maybe, just maybe, I don't want to know that reason. So here's a thing that happened to me when I was just a kid. We were living in this tiny place in Nevada, not too far from Nellis Air Force Base. Our house was on the west side of town, and there was this big desert area right behind our backyard. Kind of cool place for a kid, you know? My friends and I, we used to spend hours out there chasing lizards and pretending to be explorers. Anyway, one evening my dad had just come home from work and I heard him call out to me from the yard. His voice had this weird tone. I was the eldest, and my younger siblings were already in bed, so I was wondering what's up. I could feel that he was uneasy about something more than just needing help with his toolbox. My first thought was that he'd spotted a rattlesnake or something because we'd been seeing them around lately. So I rushed outside and he pointed at something that was hovering over the desert area, kind of southwest of our house. He was like, "Can you make out what that thing is?" You see, I was pretty familiar with all sorts of aircraft. My grandpa had been taking me to every air show possible since I was just a kid. And my uncle, he worked as an engineer at Boeing. But this thing my dad was pointing at, it was making a sound like a far-off lawnmower. Not at all the kind of sound you'd expect from a helicopter hovering at that distance. I had seen my fair share of helicopters, and this wasn't one of them. And we lived around planes, both civilian and military. This thing was not moving, and it looked to be about the size of a school bus. It was hard to make out its exact shape, but I could swear it was circular. And it had this weird glow. The light was a soft blue and it was flickering, almost like it was breathing. It reminded me of the way a flashlight's beam dances on the wall of a dark room. It just hung there in the air, as if it was spotlighting something beneath it. After we watched it for a few minutes, it began to drift slowly. The noise got a bit louder, but not as much as you'd expect from something that big that was hovering and moving slowly. The thing followed the course of the desert, west. It passed close to our house and then we lost sight of it as it drifted behind a sand dune. We walked around the south side of the house to try and catch sight of it again as it crossed the last few houses in our street. We saw it follow the desert path about 50, 60 feet above the ground. It still wasn't making a lot of noise. But then, just like that, in the blink of an eye, the light went from in front of us to hovering over the neon lights of Las Vegas, way off in the distance. A quick Google search will tell you that's over 30 miles. The crazy thing is, at that point, there was no noise at all. It was just silent, yet it had accelerated instantly. It covered those 30-something miles in the fraction of a second. We watched it the whole time, not believing what we were seeing. It then hovered over the city for about half a second, then it shot straight up at the same speed it had crossed the desert. And then we lost sight of it in the night sky as it ascended straight up. The stars are always bright at night in that part of Nevada. I remember as it went up, it lost that glow and changed to a bright blue that got brighter and brighter. It kind of looked like a firework that didn't explode, but it went much higher and faster. The next morning on the school bus, I told the kids from the end of our street about what my dad and I had seen. They all laughed at me, and I was the joke for the next couple of days. I was kind of a weird kid, you know, more into books and stargazing than sports. The subject didn't come up again until maybe a year later when I got a bit more popular and ended up being friends with one of those kids. Turned out he and his family had seen the same thing, but he had been too embarrassed to admit it in front of the others on the bus, especially after the way they had all reacted. His parents had even told him not to talk about it because people would think they were crazy. This was all back in the late 90s. I went on to study aerospace engineering and have had the chance to work on some classified projects involving aircraft and other military tech. Even spent some time as an analyst in the U.S. Air Force, focusing on studying equipment imagery, understanding their functions and capabilities, and providing that information for operational needs. And let me tell you, nothing moves like that thing moved. Nothing we have, nothing anyone has. I know some will choose to believe me and others won't. I'm certain about what I saw, but I don't think I'll ever get a satisfactory explanation for my encounter. You know, I've been tuning into your show for some time now, and I've finally plucked up the courage to share this tale of mine. It's about something strange that happened in our house, and I'm really curious to hear what you and your listeners make of it. So, my partner Alice and we live in this pretty old house in a residential neighborhood of Missouri. It's one of those houses that has seen a fair share of decades and has some pretty interesting architectural details, you know? It's got these tall ceilings and these big old-fashioned windows, and it just oozes character. Anyway, we live on the ground floor. That's going to matter later. So about 6 months after we moved in, we were getting the place ready for Christmas. You should know Alice and we're big on holidays. We love the whole shebang, decorating the tree, hanging stockings, the works. One evening, we were watching some Christmas movies on the television. You know, those Hallmark ones that are just the right kind of cheesy. It was getting late, around 9 p.m., so we decided to switch off the porch light and head to bed. Now, our house. It's got this quaint little foyer right as you enter. There's a staircase on the right that leads up to our neighbor's place, and our front door is just across from the main entrance. And then there's this door next to the staircase that leads to the cellar. When we first moved in, Alice and I had taken a look at the cellar. It was pretty spacious and old with all these corners and crevices. The cellar door, it's got this old latch on it, one of those that you have to slide and fit into a groove. We always keep it locked unless the landlord tells us that someone's coming for maintenance. So on this particular Christmas Eve, Alice and we're heading to bed when we hear the main door into the foyer creak open. It was odd because our neighbors were away for the holidays and the door was locked. Alice went over and peeked through the peephole, but the hallway was empty. We shrugged it off as maybe just the wind or something and went back to bed. But then, just as we were about to turn in, we noticed that the cellar door was ajar. Just a little, maybe an inch or so. But it was strange. It was locked when Alice checked the foyer earlier. We decided to check it out just to be on the safe side. The cellar was empty and cold, just as it should be. We locked the door again and went back to bed. The next morning, when we were heading out for a walk, we noticed the cellar door was open again. Alice was sure she had locked it. She even texted our neighbor asking if they had come down for some reason. But they were still away, remember? They made some joke about us having a Christmas ghost. We tried to laugh it off and went about our day. But that night, the cellar door was wide open again. And I mean so wide open that it was blocking our front door. Both of us a little freaked out, we decided to check the cellar again. But it was empty. We've checked multiple times since then and haven't found anything or anyone. But every single night, no matter how tightly we lock it or what we put in front of it, the cellar door just keeps opening. Maybe our neighbors were onto something with their ghost joke, because there's no way for the latch to just pop open on its own. We're hoping that once our landlord puts a proper lock on the door, this all stops. But if it doesn't, well, I guess I'll be writing to you again with an update. I mean, if it is a ghost, I hope it's a friendly one. Given the holiday season and all, a ghost of Christmas past maybe? Anyway, fingers crossed, right? Hey there. It's good to finally share this story with you all, and I'm grateful you guys are open to hearing things like this. You see, back when the whole world was dealing with the pandemic in 2020, my buddy Jake and I both found ourselves without jobs. Our restaurant was forced to close due to lockdowns, and we were stuck at home, just like everyone else. We figured we might as well make the most of the situation, given we didn't really have much else to do. We didn't have any big responsibilities tying us down, so we thought, why not take advantage of the free time? After bouncing ideas around, we decided to take a road trip across the country. We had always wanted to visit every state in the US, but never had the time. And now, we had nothing but time. We didn't really have a set route or plan. We just knew we wanted to hit all 50 states. We got some tips from other friends who had taken road trips before and got everything ready. We're from Texas, so we decided to start from there and head west. We had enough provisions for a couple of weeks. Lots of canned goods, some camping gear, and a bunch of snacks. We weren't really trying to rush it. We wanted to take our time, enjoy the journey. We had been cooped up in a kitchen for far too long. The first night we grilled some burgers over a fire. Not the same as a rabbit, but it was what we had, and we loved the idea of cooking our own food outside. We set up our tent in a quiet, secluded spot, and there was a light drizzle that night. But we were dry inside our tent. The next morning, we packed up and got on the road. We covered about 150 miles that day, which was a lot for us. We found a nice spot by a lake to set up camp for the night. We knew there was supposed to be good fishing in that lake. We didn't catch any fish, but we had a good time trying. We turned in early around 9 p.m., but around midnight we started hearing something moving around outside the tent. It sounded like it was walking on 2 feet. Now, Jake and I have done a lot of camping, so we can usually tell when it's an animal moving around. But this was different. And then we caught a whiff of something. It was like nothing I'd ever smelled before. Jake wanted to go out and investigate, but I convinced him it was best to stay put and wait. I was hoping whatever it was would just leave, but the noise continued. Eventually, we decided to take a peek outside. What we saw shocked us. There was a huge, hairy creature poking around our campsite. It was only about 20 feet away. It was standing on 2 feet, but it was definitely not human. I estimated it to be around 7 feet tall. Jake and I just looked at each other, eyes wide with fear. We thought we were done for if that thing decided to come closer. I couldn't figure out what it was. It looked like some sort of giant gorilla or something. It seemed to be sniffing around. Then it turned its head towards us. Its eyes were small and dark. The face looked like something prehistoric. Then it made this incredibly loud howling sound. All I could think to do was to fire off a warning shot with our flare gun. As soon as the flare lit up the sky, this creature, whatever it was, took off into the woods, making some kind of guttural noises. I tell you, I've never heard anything like it before. Even thinking about it now gives me the shivers. We didn't sleep a wink that night. As soon as daybreak came, we went out to take a look around. We found a path of crushed vegetation leading away from our campsite. And there were these enormous footprints that looked human, but they were way bigger than either of our feet. Jake and I didn't need to discuss it. We both knew it was time to get back to civilization. That encounter had scared the living daylights out of us. We drove until we found a small town. It must have looked like a couple of homeless guys walking into the local diner. After we had eaten and calmed down a bit, we started talking about what we had seen. I was expecting the locals to laugh at us, but they didn't seem all that surprised. Turns out there were quite a few stories about Bigfoot sightings in that area. I was taken aback at how nonchalantly they discussed it. We thought about making an official report, but that's when the teasing started. So we decided against it. In the end, we didn't report it. This is actually the first time I've really spoken about it since that day. Sometimes I wonder if we should have just kept going on our road trip.